Hannah Murray on TRE in the afternoon.
Good afternoon. Joining us on the line now is Kathy Slack. She's a food writer, stylist, photographer and kitchen gardener whose first book, From the Veg Patch, was shortlisted for the Guild of Food Writers Award for Best Cookbook 2022. Her new book, Rough Patch, How a Year in the Garden Brought Me Back to Life, is a memoir of breakdown, recovery, growth and lessons from the earth. Welcome to the show, Kathy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really chuffed to be here.
Oh, it's lovely to have you with us. And I'm really excited to hear more about your journey into gardening and things, because it started after you quit your high-flying career in London, didn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It wasn't an obvious solution to me at the time that what I needed to do was go and grow vegetables for a living. But it turned out to be my kind of the remaking of me, if you like. I mean, it's such a classic story now, but back then, which is just over 10 years ago now, it was something we perhaps didn't talk so much about, mental health. And I had properly drunk the Kool-Aid of London life. I was working for an advertising agency. I was quite senior in the agency. I had a corner office. I had my high-heeled Jimmy Choos. I had my British Airways gold card and my BlackBerry, which dates this story, doesn't it? It was before they'd invented iPhones. And, you know, I was working internationally and it sounded very glamorous. And I thought I was living the life. Like, this was what I was supposed to be doing. I was getting promoted quickly. I was earning good money. Everyone went, oh, gosh, hasn't she done well? But actually, what I didn't realize was that inside, I was a complete mess. I was riddled with anxiety. I was very depressed. And I was kind of holding it all together in that way that I think we often do, going, I'm very lucky to be in this situation and I should be grateful for it. And I'm fine. No, definitely just give me another project to work on. I'm sure I've got time, you know. And eventually my body and my brain gave out and I was signed off work, much to my dismay. They had to kind of claw the BlackBerry out of my hands. And I was saying, I can't, I've got a really important PowerPoint presentation to give this afternoon. And the doctors went, absolutely not. You need to go home. And things were quite dark for a while. But eventually I found my way into the veg patch, my little garden at the back I live in the Cotswolds in Oxfordshire, and I have this ramshackle couple of veg beds. You know, it's not an extensive garden at all. And I found my way into the garden and found a kind of peace and a solace that eventually would give me a whole new way of looking at the world, which is what I write about in Rough Patch.
Oh, and a new career. I mean, it's literally become a career for you, hasn't it?
Exactly. And that was not expected or planned, which is unlike me because I am a planner. I like life organized. I like a trajectory. I like a goal. I like a to-do list very much. And this was not like that at all. I eventually, once the drugs and the therapy started to kick in, I could go outside again and I would sit by my raised beds, which had nothing in them. I'd planted them, well, we'd built them when we moved out of London to the Cotswolds in this ridiculous vision of how life was going to be this rural idyll and it was going to be like the good life and I was going to wear dungarees and grow vegetables and, you know, have chickens and things. And of course, none of it was like that at all. So I hadn't really used these raised beds very much. And I just sat amongst the weeds and watched the worms and chucked a couple of radish seeds in the ground. And a few weeks later, I had radishes because it was the summer and they grew really quickly. And things just felt a bit, it was like the volume had been turned down on the depression and the anxiety and the chatter in my head when I was in the garden. And then I had radishes and it was just, I know it sounds ridiculous now I say it out loud, but it was transformative that these tiny little lifeless seeds had turned into something that I could eat. And I love cooking and I'm very greedy. So once I realized that, I was hooked. And yes, so as you say, I started cooking much more and I started writing down what I was cooking because I like writing stuff down. I like taking photographs. So I started photographing the food. And eventually, once I was well enough, I started blogging because that's what we did back then. This was sort of 10 years ago. and started putting it on Instagram and all that sort of stuff. And eventually went, oh, well, this is quite fun. Maybe I'm feeling better enough to do something like work. And I got a job at a local market garden, just picking vegetables and learning to grow and helping out in the garden, and became totally hooked on that. And then a job came up at the cookery school that was part of this market garden. And I ended up working there and loved teaching, and got really, because I was so evangelical about the vegetables. I was like, look, a radish, isn't it a miracle? and we'd cook our radishes and other things. And then I started writing a bit more about it. And then before I knew it, it had become, I mean, I'm truncating this story greatly, but it became a career, and I never went back to advertising. And eventually started writing books, as you mentioned before, the cookbook, which is called From the Veg Patch, as you would expect. And it's all recipes inspired by what I have in my little backyard veg patch. And then Rough Patch, which is more about the tale of how I sort of got back to the land and kind of rewilded myself, because as the further away I get from that episode in my life, the more I realize how important the vegetables were to my therapy, if you like. And they are a very common therapy, horticultural therapy. You know, we all know that getting out in nature and gardening and seeing something grow is good for us. And it certainly was for me. Yeah.
So where do you recommend people start if people are thinking, oh yeah, I'd love to grow my own vegetables? Because I think for some it can be quite daunting. And, you know, we all might have had a tomato plant over the years that we haven't managed to keep alive, or herbs that seem to get eaten by insects, so it's very easy to get put off, isn't it?
It really is. And the classic thing that people do is a bit like me. They get excited about it and then they try and do everything at once, and they're disappointed when it doesn't work. Or they pick tricky things like tomatoes and herbs are absolutely great examples, because actually tomatoes are quite high maintenance. They're a bit technical, and you need them to be nice and warm. You need them to be sheltered. You need to feed them. You have to water them very regularly. They need pinching out if they're a particular variety called a cordon variety that grows up straight. Then they're a bit tricksy. And they're quite common. They have a lot of pests that can be problematic. And so they're not the most straightforward things to grow. I always say to people, go for something that is really straightforward, that doesn't take up a lot of space, that you can keep harvesting from. So pea shoots are a brilliant way to start. I love a pea shoot because you can grow them in a window box. You can grow them in an ice cream tub, really, like an empty Tupperware or something. Put some holes in the bottom of it, pop some soil in, sow your seeds. I've been, those dried bags of peas that you can get for making mushy peas. I've sown those before, and they'll germinate quite happily. And you just plonk them in your Tupperware and keep them well watered, cover them with a little bit of soil. And in 3 or 4 weeks, you'll have salad leaves. You can pick them as pea shoots. And then if you want, you can leave them to grow into actual peas. And that's such a lovely harvest. So I would start with something straightforward. Lettuce is good as well. Cut and come again lettuce. So it germinates really easily, and you can pick around the leaves around the outside. So you always have lettuce all summer. So get a win, because the addictive bit is the feeling when you sit down for dinner and some of what's on your plate you grew and it didn't exist 2 months ago. It's just magic. And that satisfaction is what becomes addictive. And then once you've had a couple of wins, then build up to more difficult things. Like, I am still so many years away from being able to grow a cauliflower. They are surprisingly tricky to grow, which always makes me sad when you see them so cheap in the shops and people don't give them much love, because it's quite tricky plant. But, build up to a cauliflower over several years, I would say.
Okay. No, it's interesting advice, particularly what you say about tomatoes, because I've just always assumed that tomatoes are supposed to be like a real basic vegetable or fruit to look after. It's a nice kind of thing to do, but they're really difficult to look after. I've killed many in my lifetime.
You are not alone,
Oh,
and you're so at the mercy of the weather as well. You know, if you're somewhere sunny and warm and sheltered, then your main job is to remember to water them, because you need to keep watering them, but don't overwater them. Otherwise, they won't like this. They don't like that either. So they're quite particular. Whereas if you're in the very unpredictable summer in the UK, as I grow in, then you might get blight. You might, it's a real faff. I'll be honest, but they're wonderful when they work. There's nothing like it.
Yes, it is lovely having a salad, knowing that you've grown the tomatoes or the lettuce leaves or something like that. It is a great feeling. Definitely. I can see why it's addictive.
Yeah, and it makes you cook differently as well. You know, let's use the tomato example. If you've managed to grow a handful of tomatoes, all you want to do is slice that tomato, put it on a plate, maybe with a bit of salt, at most with a bit of very good olive oil. And that's it, because it's so incredible that you've done it. Like, you're not going to be making, unless you're very lucky and you have a big old glut, you don't want to be making tomato soup with this. You want to be putting it front and center of the plate and enjoying it in your tomato salad, unadulterated with anything else. You don't want it to be like the base of a bolognese or something like that. You want it to be the hero of the dish. So your cooking becomes much more simple as well, I find, which I really like.
Yeah, for sure. And you're also Fortnum and Mason's vegetable expert, which sounds like a great title. How did that come about, and what does that mean?
It is not a tough gig, I'll be honest. Yeah, it's really good fun. So with Fortnum and Masons, who are, as you can imagine, always keen to make sure that they're showcasing the best of every ingredient, I do a almost monthly class on a Sunday. We call it Seasonal Sundays, when I take people around the food hall before the store is open on a Sunday morning, and we go shopping for whatever's in peak season. So I'm doing one in a few weeks' time, and let me tell you, March is quite a tricky time, but it's going to be good fun. There's definitely going to be some rhubarb involved, because that'll be in peak season, and probably some purple sprouting broccoli. And we pick the best of everything and we bring it upstairs, and I've designed a menu that we cook together. So I'll demonstrate some of the dishes, and then everyone sits down and has a lovely Sunday lunch. It's not a chore.
That sounds amazing. And
I get to call it work.
Yes.
This is much more fun than writing PowerPoint presentations about margarine or something.
Yes, I'm guessing you don't miss your old job at all.
Yeah, my bank manager might say differently, and I certainly met some brilliant people in advertising, and it was great fun. And I saw incredible parts of the world that I would never have seen if it hadn't been traveling with work. But it definitely wasn't where my soul was happiest. It just took me a few years to realize that.
Yeah. And are you constantly kind of creating recipes, either with the idea of putting them into a book or just for something to do at home? Do you like making new dishes out of ingredients?
I do, yes. Well, I write the modern version of blogging is this platform called Substack, which some of your listeners might have come across. Yeah. And it's like blogging, but it's like a newsletter platform. And so I write a weekly recipe on my Substack, which is called Tales from the Veg Patch. And that's a really good discipline, because it means that every week you're thinking of a new recipe inspired by whatever you've got in the veg patch, which I'm looking out at my veg patch now. It's going to be quite tricky this week, because there's some kale and there's a few spring greens probably, but there's not much else going on out there. But I kind of love that, because it reminds you what the season's like, and it keeps you close to nature, if you like. I feel like nature is something that can be on your plate, and I want to make sure that I'm cooking it every week and sharing that with my newsletter audience every week as well.
Oh, nice. I have a question about kale. Now you brought it up.
Oh, yes.
I love kale. I love kale in a salad. Good. And, I love the texture and the bite and the crunch and everything. But I was watching a cooking program the other day, and they were talking about the importance of massaging kale. And it all seemed kind of odd. And I wondered how and why that does anything to change what the consistency or the taste of the kale. Yeah. What does it do?
It does. Now, massaging kale is, I first read about it in a but one of those wellness cookbooks a few years ago, and I thought, oh, good grief.
What
really,
will they come up
necessary?
with next?
What will they come up with next? I mean, it's bad enough when we put it in a smoothie, but why are we massaging it now? You know, this is not what kale is for. But I was wrong, because if you've got very baby kale leaves and they're very fresh and they're very soft, then you can just chuck them in a salad and cover them in olive oil, and that will be fantastic. But more often than not, you have slightly older leaves, and they can be a little bit tough to eat and digest when they're raw. So if you want to make a raw salad with kale, you can finely take the stems out, wash it, finely chop it, slather it in olive oil and lemon juice. You want a combination of fat and acid, and then massage it, like get your hands in there and give it a really good rub. And a minute or so of that, apart from being quite a nice therapeutic thing to do, will make the leaves of the kale much greener, much softer, much sweeter. It kind of starts to break down some of the cell walls and the fibrous bits of it. So it's much more pleasant to eat, and it won't get stuck in your teeth quite so much. And then once you've done that, my favorite is to mix it with, let's stay on this wellness front, mix it with some walnuts and some blueberries and maybe a bit of sliced apple and some avocado. Actually, there's a recipe that's quite like that in the book, in Rough Patch, with some roasted nuts and seeds in it. And you just have this lovely, fresh, I know it sounds very worthy, but it tastes delicious because you've got the irony, greenness of the kale against the pop of the salad and the creamy avocado of the fruit and the creamy avocado, and it's just a winning combination.
Oh, it sounds perfect. That's like my dream salad.
Oh, good! It's making me hungry.
Absolutely, it is. So, I love the fact that you've incorporated some recipes into the book. Then that's great.
Absolutely. Well, I kind of thought when I first started writing it and my publisher started calling it a memoir, which just gives me the ick. I was like, I don't want to call it that. It makes me sound like John Gielgud or something. Like, that's not what I am. That's not my life. It's, no. And I wanted it to be, quite funny, but also useful too. It's definitely not a misery memoir. So the beginning of every chapter, which is each chapter is a different month, and it kind of charts the year of me being signed off work to me starting in the market garden that I worked in, and how the vegetables helped me get there. So each chapter starts in a different month, and it has an explanation of what's going on in the veg patch and what you might be doing in the veg patch. But then interspersed throughout, as you say, are recipes. There's about 35 recipes in the book. And because I think in recipes, like whenever I'm sowing something or harvesting something, I'm thinking about what I'm going to cook with it. So it felt natural to put them into the book. And also I wanted it to be kind of useful for people at the same time. So I'm really happy that they were in there.
Lovely. Well, if people want to get a copy of Rough Patch, How a Year in the Garden Brought Me Back to Life, it's available on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by Kathy Slack, who we've been chatting with today. Kathy, thanks so much for joining us. Great to chat with you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.